Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Dynamics 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic is What's New in Dynamics 365 Project Operations, 2022 Release Wave 2 and 2023 Release Wave 1. My name is Peggy, and I'll be your moderator today. We're broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you're agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within the coming weeks. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions throughout today's presentation. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Satish Panwar and Martin Walker. Satish, over to you.
Hello and welcome everyone. Today we are going to talk about what's new in project operations for two release waves. Let's go right in. Before we get started, I want to share with you our Dynamics 365 implementation guide, which contains a wealth of information gained from our collective experience across thousands of Dynamics implementations. You can download it today from aka.ms/D365 implementation guide for detailed insight into how your implementations can incorporate success by design. From an agenda perspective today, we'll be talking about what's new. So we'll look through a lot of different features, followed by Q&A in the end as well. Here is a quick reference to the architecture diagram for Dynamics 365 project operations with 3 different deployment types, which are light, resource and non-stock, and stock deployment types. Light deployment is just on the data hour side. Stocked or production based is a module within Dynamics 365 Finance, and resource non-stock leverages both data hours for project manager persona and Dynamics 365 Finance for accounting. For the features we are going to talk about today, depending upon where that feature is being built. So if you see a feature is being built on the data hours, initially we might be adding it to the light deployment, but eventually our aim is to bring it to the resource non-stock deployment as well. Similarly, if we are adding a feature on the stock deployment from an accounting perspective, we might be starting with stock deployment, but we try to bring it to the resource non-stock deployment as well. Something to keep in mind as we continue to review our features. More details about the architecture is covered in our previous Tech Talk, and links for the previous Tech Talks are available in the resource section as well. So the first feature today that we'll be covering is external scheduling. The external scheduling mode let us natively create, update, and delete data in tables that are related to work breakdown structure, but without the current limits that are enforced by Microsoft Project for the Web. It also provides limited validation. This mode should be used only by the customers that either have the tools that are required to define a work breakdown structure outside the scheduling logic that is provided by Project Operations, or by customers who have to manage schedule hierarchy, dependencies, or task duration. The feature is enabled by default in the environment, but in order to show it to the users and before it can be used, the developer needs to make certain fixes for a field property so that these fields can be visible and then can be acted upon by the users. Once the field is visible, so you will see in the project parameters, there's a field called project level schedule mode override permitted. If this field is set to yes, only then the users, when they're creating the projects, they will be able to specify whether the scheduling engine is externally scheduled or the native scheduling engine, which is Project for the Web. When customers utilize this feature for a given project which is externally scheduled. If users try to get to the tasks tab, by default, it will not have any data and it will display a message that this specific project is externally scheduled. And if you want to review the tasks, you can utilize the tracking tab. When this tracking tab is opened for the first time, there is no data on this form. If external scheduling is enabled for a project, you must define the data for all WBS related tables, including tasks, team members, resource assignments, and dependencies. The feature by default does not provide ways to enter data in tables. So either if you want to provide that feature, either you need to extend the solution, but in reality, if you are already using the external scheduling engine, then you will just utilize APIs to insert data in the tables, and that way it will be visible on this specific tab. Considering there are few tables that needs to hold this data, so we have provided a data model from a project scheduling perspective. The data needs to be inserted in these tables so that it's properly visible in the tracking tab. Next feature we are going to talk about is editable resource countering. This feature provides more precision in project planning and estimation by letting customers edit resource assignment contours within multiple ranges. Building upon the first release of this feature, where API access was provided, this phase provides a time phase grid, allowing project managers to group, sort, or edit resource assignment directly in the project's main form. By default, when resources are assigned to a task in the schedule, their effort is linearly distributed to each resource based upon that resource working hours and the project scheduling mode. A project manager can use the resource assignment grid to refine that effort. So in the screenshot here, we can see it's a simple schedule that we have defined. Then we have aligned the schedule so that one task starts when the previous one is finished to build some dependency between these tasks. When looking at the assignments, the default assignments, we can see that based on the resource working hours, they have now been booked for 8 hours. This is the continuity to display that even for the following week, we have the resources booked. Now what we have done is we have edited the design task so that resource can only work for 4 hours per day. Upon update, it automatically pushed out dependent dates as well. We plan on adding few enhancements on this form in coming weeks, which includes grand total row group by periods, previous and next buttons, so that users will have even better experience. And here we can see a day view of the same grid, and this is a read-only view. So now we are on the resource assignment grid, and here we can look at either group by task or group by resources, and we can look at a different time scale as well. So this one is a daily view, and this one is more of a weekly view, so that we can even look at the resource assignment from a broader time scale. Next, we are going to talk about project budgeting and time phase forecasting. This feature provides better control over status of spend and work progress and help project managers forecast trends for the future duration of the project. In 2022 release wave 2, we will be adding this capability to the Lite deployment type of Dynamics 365 Project Operations. This will give us the infrastructure that needs to be in place for supporting this capability in the 2023 release wave 1 for deployment type of resource and non-stock. A project budget, it's a version snapshot of the financial estimation of time, expenses, and materials required on the project. Project managers will be able to create these snapshots at different periods during the project lifecycle based on revisions and re-estimations of project scope and work. The latest snapshot represents the best known scope of the project at any given time. All tracking of spend and consumption will be tracked against the latest snapshot. Project operations add this key capability to help project managers get a clear view of how they are tracking to their spend and progress targets. This provides the ability to add forecasts based on current spending trends and track these within a desired granularity of periods that are configured using project calendars and working days. So here's a quick snapshot of how the approved budget would look like. And here we have budgets for time and material and expenses. When users click on a specific budget line, they will be able to see granularity by week, how much it's budgeted, so they can look at it on more granularly. Next, we want to talk about Expense mobile app. We are working on developing a new Expense mobile application using Canvas Power App. The new mobile app will be accessible from the Power Apps mobile, and it is available both on iOS and Android devices. The app can be used for resource non-stock deployment and stock deployment. The app cannot be used with light deployments. As part of 2022 release wave 1, it will provide an intuitive Expense mobile app that is effortless to use, accelerates the reimbursement process for the employee, and increase user productivity. The new Expense mobile app lets you easily enter expense details on the go. You can capture receipts using the camera on your phone and then match them to the credit card or cash expenses. Our new Expense mobile app will be further improved with the following capabilities as part of 2023 release wave 1. It will include expense itemization. When required by your expense policy, you can split the total expense amount into the required breakdown, such as hotel day rate, fees, meals, etc. Users will be able to review and approve expense reports that are submitted to you. Users will also be able to get notifications about the expense reports that their manager has reviewed and may require an action from you. Next up is Project Service Automation to Project Operations Upgrade, which Martin will be covering us for today.
Thanks, Satish. So many of you are probably already aware that the model-driven app on the Dataverse platform is really an evolution of the code base of the product, which formerly called PSA, specifically PSA version 3. So the model-driven app is the upgrade to that former PSA version, with obviously several new features added, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. Obviously, part of that from our perspective is we want to get people on the current code base and enjoying some of those benefits. So we have a multi-phased program underway to enable people to upgrade from it. So this is just to provide you with a little bit more information on that. So the first phase of that has already been available for around a year, and that was where you would be able to upgrade your code base and upgrade your projects to Project Operations if you did not have a work breakdown structure associated with the project. In other words, you were using it, using the project to capture other information, but not necessarily to manage granular tasks underneath it. So that's been available for a while. More recently now, the next phase of that, which is available as of November, is to handle upgrades of projects of customers who have projects which fit within the defined limits for work breakdown structures. So in other words, currently 500 tasks. So if your projects fit within those constraints, then you're able to upgrade from PSA to Project Operations today. And then finally, in our next wave, the idea is to extend that to the final group of customers who have work breakdown structures that are outside of the limits of what Project for the Web is currently capable of, and also including support for the Project desktop client. Next slide, please, Satish. It's probably worth noting at this point that the target for this upgrade is to take, as I noted, PSA version 3 and upgrade it in place to Project Operations, meaning the Lite deployment. What it's not designed for is, say, starting with the Finance and Operations Project Management and Accounting module and upgrading that to a Lite deployment or to a resource or non-stocked deployment. It's also not meant to allow somebody to start with PSA version 3 today and then immediately go straight to a resource or non-stocked deployment type, because there's obviously more to it than simply getting, getting the projects upgraded is one thing. You've now got a Lite deployment, but that doesn't mean it's in sync with the Finance and Operations Project Management and Accounting module. So there's more to that transition than simply doing it in place. And finally, although the Project Operations Model-Driven App wraps Project for the Web as the scheduling engine, they are the two types of projects. In other words, one for Project Operations and one for a Project for the Web don't actually mix. In other words, you can't edit a Project for the Web project with Project Operations or vice versa. They have a project type, and if you need to edit a Project for the Web project, you do it in Project for the Web. And if you need to edit a Project Operations project, you do it in Project Operations, because there are some functional differences there. So it's not intended to take existing projects and add them to Project Operations Lite or resource non-stocked. Now, why should we do this? Well, as I noted, there are several new features that have been delivered. So it's definitely worth our customers' while to go through this upgrade, and we'll talk a little bit more about the process in a second. So amongst other things, of course, you've got our nice new project scheduling engine, Project for the Web, which also includes the ability to handle multiple scheduling modes, like fixed effort, fixed duration, or fixed units, which are described in our docs. And for those of you who are very familiar with Project Desktop Client, essentially how those scheduling modes work haven't really changed, but they're now, all three of those types are now supported in Project Operations and Project for the Web. We also now, of course, have the ability to record, in addition to time, to record material usage and on projects and tasks. We have subcontract management capability now, which we will talk about in a little more detail shortly. We also have the ability to manage advances and retainers, where for time and materials projects, you are billing either upfront or on a retainer basis, and then offsetting that against actuals when it comes to invoicing time. We also have not to exceed capabilities in the projects and validations built around that, which will allow you to put a cap on the expenditure in a project and not allow it to be billed beyond that cap. And you can also prioritize your actuals, to see which ones sort of consume that cap. Two other very important features are task-based billing, where you can have one project work breakdown structure associated with different project contract lines, which have potentially different billing arrangements. So you could have, for example, a part of a project that is not billable at all, a part of a project that's billed on a fixed price basis, and a part of it that's billed on a time and materials basis, and you're able to associate the tasks with those contract lines, and then have the billing flow accordingly. And that, of course, is all controlled on the Project Operations model-driven app. But those all flow through to finance and operations as well in a resource and on-stock scenario. And then finally, you're able to do split billing, where for a project contract, you're able to have multiple customers that you're billing for, those multiple funding sources. So these are all new capabilities that make it worthwhile upgrading from PSA version 3 to Project Operations. Now, what does that process look like? Fundamentally, there's some prerequisites to bear in mind, which is you do need to be on the latest version of PSA, and you do have to fit within, as I say, currently those task limitations. Probably the biggest piece of effort in this upgrade for most customers, if they have a significant amount of customization around in their PSA environment, will be refactoring those customizations as necessary to work with Project Operations. So an obvious example of that is if you were doing anything to manipulate the task schedule directly. Obviously, those would have to be refactored to use the scheduling API, because you can't just edit the Dataverse tables in which the schedule tables are persisted, as shown in Satish's data model earlier. You can't just edit those directly. So that's a potential source of refactoring. And obviously, just generally, features which maybe shouldn't be there anymore, that have dependencies on PSA fields that have been deprecated. Those are all documented in our docs articles on how to do this. But fundamentally, you refactor your code, you do a code upgrade process, which then gets you to a state where all your projects are now visible in Project Operations. And then there's a second step for each individual project. You actually do a you click on a button which then converts it to project for the web and makes that project editable for you. Obviously, in order to do this, you would obviously, in addition to refactoring your code, you'd want to test the result thoroughly. So you'd want to do this in a pre-production environment beforehand as well. To help our customers and partners with this, we will be making available a playbook which provides some more details on why you want to do this, and more guidance on more guidance and detail on the process for doing so. So watch for us to publish that playbook soon. And back to you, Satish.
Thanks, Martin. So next we want to talk about the cost-based sales pricing for catalog products. This feature is applicable to Project Operations Lite and resource non-stock deployment. These features greatly improve the ease with which you can bill your customers for the use of catalog products for a project. This scenario is more prevalent in organizations that use non-stock materials or catalog services for projects. For these type of products, the cost of the non-stock item or catalog service is not precisely known during the estimation phase. An approximation of the cost and sales price is used during the estimation phase of the project. During the execution phase, when the non-stock item is procured and consumed, the actual cost is recorded and the price at which it will be billed to the customer is calculated as a function of this value. In some cases, the sales price is the same as the cost, and in some contracts, the sales price is calculated as a markup in addition to the actual cost incurred. With the ability to set up sales prices for catalog products, customers can leverage the price defaulting functionality in Project Operations to ensure these products are accurately billed. Also want to bring about new feature that we are adding, which is ability to bulk confirm project invoices. This feature adds efficiencies to project performa invoices. As part of 2022 release wave 2, Project Operations will add the ability to bulk confirm project invoices. User will have ability to select multiple project invoices that have been reviewed and then confirm them simultaneously to create billed sales actual. This greatly eases the confirmation function and help improve efficiencies in invoice management. In addition to the project invoice status, we are also introducing another status to track the bulk confirmation status. Users will be able to bulk confirm up to 250 invoices at a time. Failed invoices can be tracked by using the failed bulk confirmation status. User can go to the timeline on the details tab for a given invoice to view the failed detail of each invoice. This feature is already available. If you have access to the early release, you will be able to try out this feature in your environments. Many new and existing Project Operations customers are excited to onboard the new project planning experience offered within Project for the Web. However, they find it difficult or time consuming at times to migrate their work breakdown structures from their existing Microsoft Project desktop client files. This feature provides another tool for data migration and provides a path for customers to move toward the more modern experience offered in Project Operations. With 2022 release wave 2, project managers will have the ability to import Microsoft project files, MPP, from their local devices to create projects, tasks, and task dependencies. All imported projects will need to conform to the existing limits established by Project for the Web. This feature will be available in light deployment as well as resource non-stock deployment. And if you have access to early release, you can still try this feature in your environments. When users try to import an MPP file, they will be presented with a dialog box where users can specify some of the default fields that are required for the project and select the MPP file. Once the project is initiated, a dialog box is displayed to user stating the project import has started. System will also display the result of the validation of the MPP file and any changes that may be applied to this imported project. With investments in key feature in the unified interface client during the last couple of releases, there is an opportunity to improve the user experience in different areas in Project Operations. The Project Operations team will continue to evaluate these areas with respect to number of clicks, the availability of key information needed on screen to perform the required action, and other user experience areas. In the process, we'll be looking to uptake editable grids, quick actions, main form dialogues, and other newer constructs available on the unified interface client. This will be a recurring area of investment for us. We are uptaking one grid and then implementing nested grid concepts in Project Operations to reduce the number of clicks from a user experience perspective. We will start with read-only grids, but will eventually provide inline editing experience directly in the grids. There's an increase increasing trend within modern organizations to transform their business models to sell project-based work and subscription-based services in a consolidated contractual agreement. Dynamics 365 Finance has released new features to help manage subscription-based services. These features include ability to define and manage billing schedules, record unbilled revenue based on the contractual agreement, invoice billing schedule individually or in bulk. With the release of this feature, project operations for production or stock scenario will start supporting these features. We plan to extend these capabilities in resource and non-stock deployment type in future releases. Another feature we want to review is the cancellation of purchase order receipts with connected item requirements. Currently, a manual workaround exists where users can create, if users have an item requirement purchase order and they need to reverse it, they can create a negative quantity, add, adjust return lot IDs with the consumed lot ID in the original transaction before posting the negative product receipt. This feature will provide a good user experience similar to purchase order receipt cancellation process. When this feature is enabled, the product receipt cancellation function that are associated with purchase order connected with item requirements that have not been invoiced. Upon selection, the system will cancel any posted item requirement packing slips and create posted project transaction reversals. The original entry and the reversal entry will be connected and not available for further adjustments. And it will cancel the selected product receipt. It is common for project-based companies to create an invoice for a large team that is working on a project that has recurring lifespan. Each invoicing period can involve thousands of transactions across time, expense, and material usage activity for projects that will need to be reviewed and confirmed before generating a customer-facing invoice. This process of reviewing is an essential function to ensure a quick invoice and maintain healthy operational metrics. Keeping a clean, intuitive, and performant experience for reviewing and making corrections for the project manager will add strong business value to ensure the smooth running of service-centric practice. We are bringing in the X multiple feature so that we can parallelize the crude operations in the invoicing, which will reduce the overall time in which the invoice can be generated. With recognized revenue for project contract line feature, business users will be able to model contractual agreements where revenue for portions of the project work needs to be recognized using different methods. For example, when one portion of the project uses the percentage completion revenue recognition method and another can use straight line revenue recognition. This feature will be available for customers using resource-based scenarios. When the feature is enabled, the system creates separate revenue recognition project for every project contract line. Users will be able to group the contract lines into a single revenue recognition project if desired. When revenue recognition is calculated, the system considers billing milestone for the selected contract lines and only include forecast and actuals related to those contract lines for percentage completed contract or straight line revenue recognition. As part of 2023 release wave 1, we are introducing use of deferrals for stock or production project-based deployment. With this feature, user will be able to configure cost and revenue deferral for different project transaction type. Users will have ability to record deferred cost and revenue to the project subledger as well. And next, we want to talk about subcontracting, which Martin will be covering.
Thanks, Satish. So let me preface this by saying we are planning, because this is quite a a big feature by itself. We are planning to do a separate tech talk on this to dive into more detail on how to set it up and work through various scenarios and do some demoing and so on. But we're just taking this opportunity to bring it to your attention now that this capability now exists. Clearly, in a either a light or a resource non-stock scenario, you've had the you can have been able to work with subcontract resources in the sense that you could create a user for a subcontractor and have them log into your project operations to record their time and material and expenses and so on the project. And treat them like any other resource. Of course, a subcontractor is not quite like any other resource, and there are other business processes which previously would have been taking place in parallel and kind of outside of project operations, such as in addition to actually capturing their activity on a project. You would then expect to later on, receive a bill from them, and this would all be in the context of a contract that had been signed with the subcontractor, and that subcontract would be expected to control the pricing, the contractual arrangements, including pricing and billing and so on for that subcontractor. So obviously, some of these pieces were not very well integrated before, and this adds greatly to this capability. So first of all, it gives you the ability to define vendors and contacts associated with those vendors, and those contacts can be either users or of your project operations system, or resources on whose behalf you would actually enter their actuals for them. But essentially, it then allows you to create resource records for these vendor contacts. And then those resources will appear, will be available resources in project planning and in resource scheduling and so on, just like any other resource. Of course, an important part of this, as I just noted, was around the contractual arrangements. So there's now also the concept of being able to create subcontracts for these vendors and subcontract lines within that, which define which projects a subcontractor is working on and in which possible roles and at which price. And then, of course, now that you've defined a price on those subcontract lines, you would want those prices to be used on your cost actuals as you deliver the project. And indeed, that's what it does. The selling price is obviously still defined by not by the subcontract, but by the pricing on the project contract. And that would still apply to subcontract resources for an unbilled sale if it's a time and materials project. But the costs would then, instead of coming from the default cost price list entries for that particular role, they would then come from the project subcontract, which is of course what you would want for those resources. In addition, it provides the ability to select the subcontract and subcontract line during entry of the actuals, meaning entry of time creation of time entries, material usage logs, and of quick expenses. Those actuals, of course, would then be processed, approved, and processed as usual. But then, in terms of so that's in terms of the entry. But obviously, for resourcing the projects, we've now also added the ability that you can have those dimensions of subcontract and subcontract line appear on your schedule board and your schedule assistant, so that you are able to, for a particular generic resource requirement, find an appropriate resource, which could be any resource, or it could be for a specific subcontract, or it could be a particular subcontract resource. So it allows you to add those dimensions and say, okay, I don't want to use an internal resource for to fulfill this resource requirement. I would like to use a subcontractor for this from this particular subcontract and subcontract line, and those search criteria are then honored in the schedule board. Then obviously the next piece of the puzzle is, all right, the project work has been delivered, but you're now receiving a vendor invoice from the subcontract vendor. So there obviously needs to be a reconciliation process for that. So how that works is you create and post a pending vendor invoice, and there's now an additional field on the vendor invoice header, which says whether the invoice should be validated on the Dataverse side or not. Obviously, as before, with any other sort of vendor invoice for, say, material consumption or or services or whatever, we already had the capability to feed those vendor invoice lines back to Dataverse, where they would then be automatically approved and become actuals. But the difference is now is that instead, if you set that flag that they have to be reconciled on the Dataverse side, the posted vendor invoice lines will be sent over to Dataverse, and then the project manager will have a form which allows them to verify the vendor invoice, basically through a matching process where they are matching up the vendor invoice lines and their amounts with the actuals that had previously been approved on that project. Then once you go ahead and confirm that everything matches up, then it reverses the original actuals and uses the final actuals as reflected on the pending vendor invoice. So that's obviously a fairly complex process when you think about it end to end, but all the elements are there now. And as I said, we are planning to do a tech talk on this specifically. I think I covered everything on the slide here. So in that case, back to Satish.
Thanks, Martin. You've also put together a list of resources that you can leverage to either for learning purposes or if you want to know the current status of a given feature. So we have also provided the release waves links as well. So if you want to know whether this feature has already been released or if there are any changes to the schedule, you can always go to the release notes and it would provide you the latest status. Some useful links from an SLA compliance and support perspective that we have provided here as well. And that kind of concludes our presentation. Martin, are there any questions that we want to kind of take on?
No, we've answered them along the way, so there are no additional questions outstanding at this point in the Q&A.
Thanks, Martin. With that, I would say I would hand it over back to Peggy.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Satish. Thank you, Martin. If the attendees could have a look in the live event Q&A panel, I've posted a link to a short survey. We would love your feedback on today's session and hear what you'd like to see in future events. So again, thank you so much for your participation there. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within the coming weeks. So a big thank you to our presenters and our audience for joining today. Have a great day or evening wherever you are.